All right, in this tutorial, I'm going to explain how to handle citations and then a little tiny bit about tying them to the references. So when I use the word citation, I'm referring to these notations that appear within the text of your paper, where you give the author and the year of publication. So in APA 7, which is the publication manual that we're using for this class, because it's the current one, there are very specific rules for how to handle 3 or more authors versus 2 authors versus 1 author. So I'll start with the 1 author because it's super easy. If you have 1 author to cite, you provide their name and the year of publication, and that's it. If you have 2 authors, you always list both of them. If you're presenting it in parentheses, then you separate the 2 authors with an ampersand. That's what this symbol is called. So you separate them with the ampersand if it's in the parentheses. Let's see if I can find a reference outside the parentheses for a 2 author reference or citation. Here we have Chen and Wang. Outside the parentheses, you use the word and. So outside the parentheses, you have the word and. Inside the parentheses for 2 authors, you use the ampersand symbol. But with 2 authors, you always list both. I've seen students for some reason listing only one of them, and that's not correct. If you have 3 or more authors, every single time you cite them, you list the first author's last name, followed by these Latin words et, and then al is a truncation of the actual Latin word that means others. So et means and al is the shortened version of the Latin word for others. So it needs a period after it because it's a shortened version of a word. And then a comma if you're doing this within the parentheses. So it's Mitchell et al. Period, comma, and then the year of publications. So that's the whole citation for this string of authors, Mitchell and others. Sometimes I've seen students italicize the et al. Because it's a Latin word. You don't do that in APA format. Et al. Does not get italicized. So how I've got it written here is the correct structure for an et al. Strategy. Now, if it's outside the parentheses, Jung et al. Is going to be no comma after the al. Jung et al. You still need the period because that's a shortened word, and then the year goes in the parentheses. So those are the rules for 1 author, 2 authors, and 3 authors. Now, what are the rules for when to cite? The overarching rule is as soon as you say something that is derived from another source, you need to cite that source as soon as you possibly can. So you'll notice in my sentence here, fortunately, most students do enjoy online classes and report that they are likely to take them in the future. That part I got from Mitchell et al. So as soon as I said that, I cited that. Then you see after the parentheses, there's a comma. And students of all thinking styles enroll in them. And here's that citation of Bishop and Foster. So as soon as I have an idea that came from Mitchell and others, I put that in as soon as it happened. As soon as I had something that came from Bishop and Foster, I gave that citation. Now notice in this sentence, again, I have 2 citations in one sentence. Carr inferred satisfaction from course completion rates, whereas others, for example, is what this E.G. means. So for example, Bray et al. I included the phrase for example because Bray et al. Is one example of studies that I found where they use student evaluations to determine whether the students were satisfied with the class or not. So you don't have to list every article that ever happened, that ever studied that issue of student evaluations. You can say, for example, here's one, right? And so that's what I did in that structure. When you make a citation, it will be assumed that everything you say until another citation is attributable to that first one. So Jung et al. Assess satisfaction by comparing attitudes towards online learning before and after an online course, whereas some have relied on student self-reports of learning, for example, Ferguson and De Felice, and others have relied on final grades in the class, for example, Gallian and Uman Early. So in one sentence, I've got 3 different ways that satisfaction was measured, and I cited each of them. And the Ferguson and the Gallian citations have the for example in front of it because they are not the only ones who use that strategy, but they're just examples. In your paper, given the number of references that you're required to have, you might feel the need to say, for example, because you know that there are other ones there and you didn't read them. You only cite sources that you yourself read and you know for sure they said these things, right? Or that they did these things in their structure. So don't list a whole bunch, some of which you didn't actually read. I didn't necessarily read every single article that relied on final grades to determine course satisfaction. I know that Gallian and Uman Early did that. I know that they cited other people having done that, but I didn't read the other ones. I wasn't interested in grades as a way of measuring satisfaction. So I was just like, some people do it like this. And I just gave that example. I know there are other ones out there, but I didn't read them. So now, as far as do you put it at the beginning of the sentence? Do you put the citation at the end of the sentence? You're seeing in my example, I put them all the places, right? I have this one's in the middle, this one's at the end, this one's at the beginning. One rule I can tell you very clearly is that if it's at the beginning, you cannot start a sentence in APA format with a parentheses. So you have to pull that author's name out of the parentheses and let it stand free. So you see Jung et al. Now just the year is in parentheses, assessed satisfaction by comparing attitudes, right? So you can pull those authors out of the parentheses, let them start the sentence, but make sure that you're structuring your sentence so that it's grammatically correct if you were to take the parentheses out. So Jung et al. Assessed satisfaction by comparing attitudes towards online learning. Okay, that's a grammatically correct sentence. Here we have, whereas some have relied on student self-reports of learning and others have relied on final grades in the class. That's a sentence that stands grammatically correct if you take out the parentheticals, right? So always test whether, you have put too much or the wrong things into the parentheses by removing the parentheses from the sentence, and does the sentence still make sense? What else do students ask me about? All right, let's say, let's go down to a paragraph. Yeah, this one, Dow 2008. So I start off citing Dow 2008. They discovered that social presence, blah, blah, the greatest predictors of student satisfaction were that. As for online discussion boards, many students in Dow's study. Now, I didn't put the year here because I'm still, you can tell I'm still talking about Dow. Dow discovered social presence, the greatest predictors of student satisfaction were. As for online discussion boards, now I'm like, many students. I don't want to just say many students reported that miscommunication is common. Which students? So I went ahead and said, in Dow's study, to make it really clear, I'm still talking about Dow. And then nonetheless, Dow's participants reported that it's easier to speak up online than in traditional face-to-face classes. Okay, so this entire paragraph is devoted to Dow. You only see the year at the very beginning. If it said Dow 2008 there at the top, and then it said many students in Dow's 2008 study, nonetheless, Dow's 2008 participants, I would give you the comment you're oversighting because you don't need to put 2008 every single time. We know you're still talking about Dow. Nothing else has come in between. It's clear that you're still talking about that same source. You don't have to give the year every time. Only insert the author's name again if it's possible that the reader could misconstrue who or what you're talking about, right? So insert the name again if you were to take that part out and now it becomes like ambiguous. What students? What participants, right? So I like to stick their name in anytime it might be confusing. Now here I introduced Denner, and this paper was written before the APA 7 came out. So you're going to notice that in the old structure, you listed 3 authors or more. No, 3 authors were listed and they changed it. So I'm trying to fix it as we're going along. So Denner et al. Reported similar findings. Student satisfaction was directly related to clear instructor expectations. Okay, so that's from Denner et al. Gallian and Newman Early expanded on Denner et al. Now I put the year there because of the possible ambiguity. What Denner et al. Are you talking about? So I want to make sure, because I mentioned another person in between, another source in between, that I made it really clear there's no new Denner here. It's the Denner I was just talking about. So it's Denner et al. 2007. So that's when, if it's possible that the reader might get lost. I'm actually going to pop down on my reference list really quickly to see if I had even more reason for doing that. Oops, I'm in the wrong part. Nope, there's only one Denon on the list. Especially if you have the same author having written more than one paper, is really super important to, make sure to clarify who you're talking about. So you can place your citation wherever it makes sense. So just make sure that you're constructing your sentence around your decision about how to present that citation. So like this one says, instructor feedback was prominent in Ferguson and DeFelice's comparison of online graduate students, right? So see how Ferguson and DeFelice '(s), because we're talking about their comparison, right? So just make sure that you're structuring it in such a way that it's grammatically flowing and it makes sense. That's the trick. There's lots of correct ways to do your citations. There's really only a few wrong ways. One wrong way is to say everything you're going to say about that one study and then at the very end give the citation. That would be wrong. You want to put the citation as early as you possibly can while making it make sense. I've had students who will have like an entire paragraph and then at the very end of the last sentence, right before the period, they'll put the citation. And I'm like, am I supposed to infer that this covered everything in this paragraph? Because it's not clear. Whereas if you put that citation at the very beginning of the paragraph, it will be assumed that everything in that paragraph is referring back to that one citation. All right, so now the last thing I wanted to mention is about your reference list tying to these citations. Every single thing that is cited in this paper needs to appear on your reference list, and every single thing that's on your reference list needs to be cited in your paper. This is a little bit different from other kinds of styles of writing. I don't know if it's MLA or Chicago or whatever, where anything that sort of inspired your thought is supposed to go on the reference list. We don't do that in APA. Only those things that get directly cited appear on your reference list. And because you have a limited number of references that you're required to do, I actually do go through and make sure that everything that's cited is on the reference list and everything that's on the reference list is cited. And so that would be something that would come out of your references and citation points if I discovered a mismatch. So yours, you have a small number of references, so you're going to be able to probably fit them on one page. I have pages and pages of references in mine, so it's easy for me with the number that you're doing to pop back and forth and make the comparisons. It's also very easy for me to grade references and make sure that you've got everything correctly formatted. So make sure that you've got, the word references bold and at the top of the page, that you're using the hanging indent that I've explained in, the APA formatting guidelines. I've got little screenshots for you and everything. And so make sure you're following all of these rules for how to correctly format your references. Make sure that you're following those rules for how to correctly do the citations, and make sure there's a good match. And, I'm always happy when a person gets full credit on their references. It's super rare. It's super easy for me to find little mistakes that a person just didn't notice when they were creating their reference list or in the style that they used for their citations. So just try and be aware. You have to be very detail oriented in the references part. You have to be a little bit creative in the citations to make it flow in such a way that the citation makes sense in that sentence, and to make sure that you're citing early enough and making it clear enough that the things that are coming after are still part of what you're talking about. And I'm always really super happy if I just get to click full credit on that reference component. All right, well, we'll get to practice these things, at least the reference composition in APA Project 3, so that'll give you good practice for that. So hopefully you're not feeling super nervous and you'll be really confident going into this last part of writing up your paper. All right, well, I hope that helps. If you have questions, of course, as usual, ask me. All right, talk to you later.